And thank you to West Point Women for helping us host this great webinar. And of course, to the West Point AOG for bringing us all together in our alma mater. My name is Kate Shattuck. I'm a senior client partner at Korn Ferry. More importantly for this, our purposes today, I am your moderator to this exceptional group of graduates and West Point women. I'm going to briefly introduce myself, Kate Shattuck, class of 1996, proud C4 and F3, mount up and go Cowboys. And professionally, I stayed in the Army for about 7 years. And now I'm a partner at Korn Ferry. It's an executive search firm. I am on your West Point AOG board of directors, where I've served for 3 years. And I'm excited to be a volunteer also with our diversity committee and the vice chair of our finance committee. I'd like to have our wonderful panel introduce themselves, and we are going to go in class order. So Nadja, I'd like to turn it over to you.
All right. Good evening. All right. So basically, we're, you're saying I'm the oldest one here, huh? No.
You out a little bit on that, yes.
No, hi, I'm Nadja West, class of 82. I was in company C1, my full time. We didn't do any kind of shuffling or reorganization, charge in Charlie 1. And also part of the select few and the select fewest, our ladies of 82. And I just want to say, hey.
And Nadja, can you share what public company boards that you're on?
Sure, I'm on the boards of Johnson & Johnson, Tenet Healthcare, and Nucor Corporation.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And next, I think, is Kathy.
There, I'm Kathy Widmer, class of 83, E1, damn it. I served in the field artillery for 5 years after graduation and then came straight to Johnson & Johnson, where Nadja has recently joined our board of directors. I actually met her through this panel. I currently lead Johnson & Johnson's consumer business in North America and Latin America, and I sit on the corporate board for Texas Roadhouse Restaurants, which is a chain of casual dining restaurants, about 600 of them in the US and many abroad. And I also sit as vice chairman of the board for Wounded Warrior Project. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you, Kathy. Karen?
Hi, everyone. I'm Karen Lee. I'm of 1986 and company G1, Go Greeks. Courage never quits was our motto. And I'm flabbergasted to even be here on this panel with all of you. And quite frankly, I don't feel as if I'm quite deserving to be here. So it's just truly a pleasure and an honor, because from the class of 86, we just looked up to all of you that came before us so much. It's just huge. I am on the public company board I am on is called, gosh, now I got nervous and I forgot what it is, but I'm on a private company board, and my public company board is, I'm blanking.
Lise Lewis. And you're also on the Federal Reserve Board as well.
Yes, and then I'm also on it's a natural gas company board. I don't believe I'm actually this nervous to be in your presence, but I'll think of it in a second. And it's just a pleasure, a huge pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Karen. And Jen?
Hey, I'm Jen Buckner. I am West Point class of 1990, G1, Go Greeks as well. I retired from the Army in 2019, so about 30 years. And I currently lead technology risk for MasterCard. And just a shout out to the West Point Network, Ron Green, C190. My classmate is also my boss here as the Chief Security Officer. And I am also a director with US Express. Some of you may have seen our trucks on the road, but we are transforming to a technology company that moves freight.
Oh, that's great. And Melanie.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Melanie Little, class of 92. I was in G2 and then G3. So I apparently am the youngest of the group, which since our 30th is coming up, does not feel young, but also very honored to be part of this group this evening. I currently am still working for a few more years. I work at an oil and gas company in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And the public board I'm on is Diversified Energy, which is headquartered in Birmingham, Alabama, assets in Appalachia, and just recently acquisitions in Louisiana and Texas. So they're growing and they're traded in London. So I think we're going to talk about that a little bit. I'm also on an association industry board, ILTA, which is the Independent Liquid Terminals Association. And I also serve in Tulsa on our children's museum called the Discovery Group. And we're building a wonderful new children's museum here that'll be done this fall.
Great, thank you. Thank you all. What I loved about putting this panel together and in meeting all of you was really the diversity of experiences on boards, international boards, some nonprofit boards, and leading to public board service. Also, I thought it was interesting that we have some folks that have retired from an operational life and are going to board service as a part of a new career, and others who are still in very much an operational role. So what I'd like to start with, we have a number of questions that have come from the field, and also even from some of the folks that are attending today. But why don't we start out with why? Why were you interested in board service? What made you think that it was a good idea for you? And why don't we start with you, Jen?
Yeah, thanks. So, the transition was really felt natural, a part of the professional and personal development that, that we all kind of strive for. Look, we obviously bring experience from the Army in operational leadership and direct leadership. And of course, most of us also have a chance at that strategic vision and oversight. So the transition to I'm not doing and that operational piece, but setting conditions for the right level of governance and oversight, but also for a different metric, right? Delivering shareholder value is also brought a kind of a new dimension and dynamic to it. So, I thought I had a lot to offer on that governance and oversight, but also really wanted to learn on the revenue driver side and really, some different outcomes that perhaps weren't a part of our service in the military and with government.
And over to you, Melanie.
Yeah, so my journey is similar to Jen's. I really was looking, so I'm still working, I have operational responsibilities for oil and gas company that I work for. And I looked at my career and really where I wanted to grow. I specifically wanted to be associated with an E&P company, and I really wanted the opportunity to serve on a public board. And we'll talk, I think, later, but my leadership team here and our board of directors at Magellan, where I work, were supportive of that from a developmental role. And so that's really what led for me to pursue, for all the things that Jen just said, I wanted to experience before I retire the opportunity to be in that oversight, the governance. I felt like I had a lot to bring, but I also felt like I had a tremendous amount to learn. And I've certainly seen over the last 18 months that things that I'm experiencing on the DEC board, I'm able to bring back to my Magellan job and vice versa. When I have experiences here, I can call the COO or the CEO over at DEC, and the collaboration has been an extremely positive experience for me. And really for me, it was professional and a personal development opportunity.
Thank you. Another question that came out really early in our discussion is about, Melanie, you talked about over the last 18 months, right? Unprecedented. And we certainly have a number of you here who are working right in the healthcare industry as well. But what are the requirements for board service? And can you talk to us a little bit about how those requirements have maybe even ebbed and flowed? So Nadja, I'd like to start with you. How did you think about learning even about the requirements for board service?
Thanks, Kate. My mouse is just like playing tricks with me. I'm trying to move it and it's moving. So thanks, Kate. But that's a great question. And so my to be honest, I never thought of really board service until literally for transition. The recommendation was to go to this course called Battlefield to Boardroom, which was put on by the National Association for Corporate Directors. And it was a 2-day course, and it really kind of gave you an idea of what actually board work was about. Not like you see in the movies with some of those Michael Douglas movies where guys in the back room with smoking cigars and overstuffed leather chairs, but it really talked about since Sarbanes-Oxley and all the issues they had with board members kind of asleep at the wheel and horrible things happening back in the 80s when you hear and 90s and forward. So they talked really about what the responsibility of the board is, to add your fiduciary responsibility, oversight. And so it was really intriguing because we do that in the military. I mean, you're responsible, especially for example, in MedCom. 130,000 folks in all the hospitals and research and everything, research facilities, educational facilities. So I thought that maybe some of what I did in the Army could transpose to that. And the NACD, that National Association of Corporate Directors, it's where I kind of started my journey. The course was phenomenal because it kind of gave you like a taste of what each area on governance, the financial piece, some people have to be financially literate, meaning a little bit about it, but for the audit committee, you have to actually have a background in finance. And then all the other things, with compensation and depending on what board you're on, there's multiple other types. There's a science and technology committee at Johnson & Johnson, for example, and Tenet just started an ESG, in the environmental, social, and governance committee. And so, the NACD has a lot of resources so you can learn about it. And you don't have to be on a board to be a member of the NACD. And so they have blue ribbon reports where they actually look at organizations, look out at the industry to see what are the issues that are going on in business. So that's where I got a lot of my training from, is those resources that the NACD has on their website, and the staff that they have that are very user friendly, that can assist you in resume writing and all those different interview questions, how to interview, as well as some of the things to think about when you're in the board meeting, questions to ask and things to look at.
We're definitely going to come back to the recruiting process and what were some of the questions. But I'd like, Kathy, you are our longest serving board member, having been on Texas Roadhouse for a number of years. So can you talk to us a little bit more and build on what Nadja shared? Talk to us about the requirements for board service and maybe how those have changed over time.
Yeah, so I've been on the Texas Roadhouse board for 8 years. And I think the thing that struck me the most right off the bat is one, I definitely think it makes me better at my day job because it's a completely different lens and it's different than an operational day-to-day job. It's more, as Nadja said, it's about hiring the most senior leadership and compensating them and evaluating them. It's about the strategic direction of the company and providing some guidance to that. And then the fiduciary financial oversight, which for me, and I've worked with financials my whole career at Johnson & Johnson, but it's different from an investor lens. And the whole, unless you've worked in investor relations as a career, which I have not, that was probably the piece of board service where I literally had to go to school a little bit. And when I joined Texas Roadhouse, they helped prepare me that way. But I'm not going to be an expert in the audit committee, and I'm never going to be the I'm not a CPA, but you are, as a board director, signing off on the quarterly earnings report and on all the financials, and you're personally accountable for it. So you have to have a level of competence, which was probably the single biggest hurdle for me. And I found that it's, I'm able to do it. I'm a busy person, but I always say, you want something done, give it to a busy person, give it to a busy woman, even better. And it's been pretty even across the years, except I will say that, this past March, the CEO of Texas Roadhouse unexpectedly died. And that became very much a 911 situation. I got that call on a Thursday night. By 6 a.m. Friday morning, we were all in where their headquarters is in Louisville. And by 8 a.m. had appointed a new CEO, made all of the communications, and the ball keeps rolling because it's all about the reputation and the continued success of the company. So I will say that was it's an anomaly, but there are crises, and you have to, when those happen, it's not business as usual, obviously.
Thank you. Wow. And Nadja, you're on a many, but we thought about asking the question about your journey to your first paying board. A little bit different than a nonprofit or a foundation board. And I thought, Karen, that you had an interesting story about your journey to your first paying board. So could you share with us a little bit more about that?
Yes, thank you. And I did remember the name of the board I was on. It's the Northwest Natural Holding Company. But my route's a little bit different. I'm a CEO in my day job of a large regional company here that's based in Seattle, Washington. So because I have a board of my own, I knew a little bit about board dynamics, and also just for me, most of my positions have kind of come through gradual positions where I just get a higher and higher position in the organization, and my board service was no different. So my first paying board was a regional board, and it was non-fiduciary, but it was still paying. And I had two of those. Then I was on a privately held company board, and then finally a publicly held company board. And the two regional boards, at that point, I thought that I really wanted to take board service seriously and put myself in position. And I called. We have in Seattle, we have some women who are really open to helping other women, and one of them is a well-known CEO here, and I called her one day and said, "Can you help me? What do I need to do? I want to put myself in a position to have a board seat." And first, she took my call, and I was nervous like I was today. I was just honored. But second, she told me that I would need to start on a smaller company, and that the first board position was the most difficult to get. But then once you're able to get that one, then you can progress to a larger board. And that's exactly the process. She actually knew the board that I was talking to, and then we talked a lot about the board chair, and we talked about how you show up in meetings. I even asked her, "Can I talk during the first year?" And she said, "Well, check with your chair, but yes, you can." So I say that all to say that there's a formal route it's important to go through NACD and other like organizations, and there's also an informal route. And for me, I had to be able to do both, and just take it in progression. So when a board recruits me, they know what they're going to get generally, and then I know generally what skills they want and what I can add to the governance structure of the organization.
We're going to come back to board culture. I think you kind of alluded to a little bit. But Melanie, I wondered, tell us a little bit more about your journey to board service and about networking and working toward the first board.
So my journey was a little bit different than Karen's. I first reached out, like I mentioned. First of all, I talked to my mentors about what I could do to develop. And I specifically wanted to serve on the board, what type of things I needed to look at. And I think we're going to talk a little bit later. I think it's really important that you understand why you want to be on a public board. And then most of us, I think, we're probably targeting certain either industries or size companies. So after talking to mentors and then getting clearance from my board of directors and my CEO, I actually went to a number of headhunters like you, Kate. I didn't actually reach out to Kate, but just from hiring individuals within my organization, I have a pretty diverse network of agencies and companies. And through that process and connections, I started to get contacted for opportunities. And that's how my journey was. And I ended up working with Hydrix and Struggles out of Houston. Specifically, I was looking potentially for other industries, but given a choice, I was looking for upstream in oil and gas to diversify, again, my background and development. And it actually happened pretty quickly. I would absolutely think we're going to talk about it. You don't have to take the first one. You definitely have to get to know the board and know that it's a good fit. So we'll talk about that. But my journey was more about finding the company that I felt was a good fit for what I could bring, what I could learn. But most importantly to me, did I feel like, to Karen's point, could I have a voice? It was important to have a voice. And could I make a difference within that organization? And was it a good cultural fit?
And the board that you're on is international. How do you think that that's different? Or was the journey different? Or was the process different in your mind as you explored both US and international companies?
So the journey was it was interesting. It's a US based company with only US assets. They chose when they went public for a number of reasons to go public on the UK. So from a public perspective, they're traded in the UK. They're now the FTSE 250 versus trading in the US. And there's a long story there. I did a lot of homework between the two because the governance is very similar, but there are a lot of differences. In the UK and Europe, if you are a company that's based in those countries, especially around environmental, social, and governance, is actually regulatorily driven, whereas in the US, the SEC is looking at different things. A lot of us are doing things voluntarily within our companies and our boards, but the UK and Europe are typically 4 to 7 years ahead of the US from a governance perspective. So that's a big challenge. It's a lot more to learn. So learning about UK corporate structures and what's expected has been a journey. And also, we may talk about later, compensation is different. If anyone out there is looking at a UK or Europe or even non-US based company, I would highly recommend understanding the compensation, because Canadian, Australian, UK, Europe, the pay is not going to be in stock and units. It's very, very rare, whereas US companies prefer that.
Great. That's very interesting. And Karen prior talked a little bit about networking and finding some women that were helpful, which certainly is a close place of my heart. And also, I think really important to not only our West Point network, but our West Point Women's Network in particular. Jen, you were talking a little bit as we were getting ready for this panel on how did the West Point Network help you, and maybe even the West Point Women Network. So I would love for you to share a little bit more about that.
Yeah, well, this is almost like a softball question because I am the poster child for the how West Point Women and our network deliver. It was exclusively through a West Point Women connection. And in fact, it was actually just a posting on the West Point Women Facebook page in which Jess Bice, I think she's class of 2000, she and I had been on a Ragnar relay together, and so had bonded, over 36 glorious hours between in Maryland and DC. And her uncle is the CEO of a company, and he was looking for a retiring military officer. I like the way that others have kind of talked about the importance of culture and finding that right fit. And he thought that a military officer would bring the right experience and expertise. And certainly, the freight industry leverages a lot of military credentialing. And so she posted on the Facebook page and I reached out, and that is actually how I got connected. I was in the same NACD class as Nadja on that transition piece, and it was such a great class. And one of the things they tell you is that you can go through all of the right processes, but usually it's your personal and professional network that kind of connect you with the right opportunity, recognize a good fit. And certainly that was the case here. And when I interviewed, it was probably a 9 or 10 month process for that, but there was a little bit of, interviewing on both sides as Karen and Melanie have said, are you the right cultural fit for me? Do I think I add value or, meet a need on that board? And I do like to say that I did spend the first year kind of a little bit silent and just in learning mode, as you said, and the questions were like, oh, what you doing? But now, a year in, I kind of have my feet underneath me, and I really like the way that folks have talked about they bring their day-to-day job back to their board experience as well. So I'm in a position of, considering technology growth and risk in my current job. I prepare board decks, but then I'm also on the receiving end now. And so I have that lens, and it's really helpful on both sides. But thank you, Jeff Spice.
That's great. I would like to build on that a little bit on your comment, Jen, about the recruiting process. And Karen, you alluded to it a little bit in your comments about the recruiting process. There was this, the godmother of boards in Seattle, and you got to know other what board was going to be the right person to you. Can you describe a little bit more about the recruiting process?
Yes, so I have probably gotten on my boards more through networking, and the person to help me make the decision and have confidence in the process was the godmother, I'll call her. But the nominating committee, or the outgoing board chair, on the boards I'm on, they were looking for something specific, and they had reached out to their own networks, and then those networks coincided with mine. And so on the first board, I really fit something that they were looking for. The second board was one where I really got along well with the board chair, and we knew each other from a nonprofit board that we both served on, and something about my background really spoke. They were looking for somebody who had operational knowledge in the utility business, which I had spent 10 years there. So I fit from that perspective. And then I think, as a graduate of West Point, that is something that a lot of people really respect. And I was only in the military for 5 years, but military service is something people really, really respect, particularly if your board if it's majority men. That will give them some degree of comfort. So for me, the networking part was probably 70 to 80% of it, of the initial attraction, and then my background and experience took over from there.
I think someone had mentioned something about like what questions that you might be asked in the recruiting process of a board. I can't remember that you had been a little bit prepped on those questions. Maybe it was you, Nadja. I don't want to call you on the spot, but about any surprising questions that you got asked during the recruiting process?
Not surprising. And again, NACD, before my interview, I actually emailed one of the individuals that was in the battlefield of Boardroom, and then he sent me a copy of like questions that they might ask, but nothing surprising. I think the thing is to try to learn about the company, to learn as much as you can. And so when they ask you the question, why do you want to be, what do you think you can add to this company? You can at least have some information that you've looked it up and were, prepared to answer those questions. And mainly it's just one where, every single one of them, I joined a couple before COVID, and so it was in person, and there was the chairman of the board really made an effort to meet every single person on the board, all 12 members before, just so you can, so they could provide their feedback, get a fit of what, how you would fit into the board. And so that's kind of what they would ask about, what's your style, just to get to know you. If you had leadership opportunities, what were some of the challenges? What was one of the, biggest mistakes that you ever made? And what did you learn from it? So they kind of all those types of questions, but it's more of a sensing of, what can you bring? And then and they usually know what they need in their board. So for example, there's one board, 2 board members are going to be leaving in a couple of years because they're aging out. They're on the public boards, there's an age requirement that the SEC sets and things. And so one of them is financial. So they're going to need someone with heavy financial. And then if there's like a specificity to the board, if it's a healthcare board, like I'm in one in the steel industry, you know, there's certain expertise in that. A marketing person, if they want the expertise, so the board mix has that diversity of thought, not only in just diversity of the type of people, but the diversity of the information and your areas of expertise. And so that's kind of during the questions, they try to ferret out what areas are you an expert, that you could bring. And then it also lines up what committees that you would be on. You know, how can you add to the committees as well? But there were really no surprising questions. You know, I think the military trains us well to be agile, adaptable, and prepared for anything. But I think it's one to have an idea of what you can bring, you specifically can bring, you know, not just in general, but in specific to the company. If you can learn a little bit about what's going on and what's going on in the industry that they're in. So, you know, like in the healthcare industry, what are some of the external factors that might be there? Reading some of the analyst reports on the company, on what they think is going, you know, where they're going, some of the risks of it. And you can, you know, Google those. There's usually several of the, you know, companies that do analysis in the sector analysis. So what sector that they're in. So.
Can I just add to that? Because you highlighted the fiduciary responsibility and some of the interviewing. And I mean, I was very candid that I had a lot to learn on the financial side. And so fortunately, I think, you know, you've mentioned how they also kind of mentor you on that side as well. And so the board chair is a CFO in his real job. And so he was like, I will help you learn. And so it was a good, you know, I have something to offer, but they also were very visibly committed to my own development as a rounded out board member, knowing that financial part was not something I offered from the Army, but, you know, could learn.
That's great. And Melanie, I think that you talked about, similar to Nadja, meeting all the board members. And that was one thing that you mentioned as we got to know each other, you felt was really important to you, was getting to know all the various members of the board. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, just similar to Nadja, I had the opportunity to interview, obviously, with the chairman and the CEO, but I also was afforded I actually asked, I made it part of the decision-making process to have the opportunity to either have a Zoom call, this was before COVID too, or meet in person the other board members. I think just with an hour, you know, conversation, you know, pretty quickly, usually within about 5 to 10 minutes, if there's potentially going to be just diversity of thought is great. And similar to what Nadja and Jen just talked about, you know, they know what they're looking for. And so how do you fit in? Understanding, do you hear the same answer across the board? Understanding their backgrounds, what can you learn from them? But a lot of it's just personality. The other thing is, all of us are women. There is a big push today for diversity on boards. I knew for a number of the boards that I looked at that they were specifically looking for a woman and a woman with operational experience. And so I also wanted to make sure that I was not going to be the token diversity candidate selected, that again, having a voice on the board was much more important to me. But I think it's important for us to recognize there are times we are being, you know, I know today our board's looking for another diversity candidate to add. And that's specifically with some specific skill sets. And I didn't get the sense at all that, yes, they were looking for diversity. In UK, you have to have a 30% women on your board. We don't have that. We're at 29%, so we're adding another one. But I was also fortunate that I came on board within about 4 weeks of the other female that was brought onto the board. She started at West Point, class of 80 or 81, Sandy Stash, ended up at Colorado School of Mines. And just, she's been a great resource and mentor and friend really too. So it's been a great experience.
Oh, that's great.
Hey, can I jump in on
ma'am.
that? I just wanted to add real quickly that be on a board where you have the potential to like all the other board members. You want to be on this board until you're 75. I mean, until you age off. And so I think it's just really important to like the other board members quite a bit, because you're going to be spending time together, and that company is going to have its ups and downs, and you want to be with people that are going to be in it with you. And then the other thing is that you want to be a board member of an industry that you can relate to. If you care about that industry, that just makes it just all the more a meaningful experience. And so I would say, don't forget all the emotions that go in with it, and then just don't go with a company that's after you. If that's an industry you truly isn't one that you care about. I just wanted to add that because the employees in those companies, all of their wealth is tied up in that company. Those employees may have been there for 30 years, and you are governing that, all of their retirement, all of their stock options, and the same with the leadership team and the CEO. So so really try to join companies that you care about them and you love that industry.
I would also just quickly add that I also asked to speak and have a one-on-one in person with the COO and the CFO. Just again, from a personality, they come into the board meetings just like we do in our companies all the time. And not that that would make my decision, but the company's fairly new, being public. They're at 4 years. They were just over 2 when I joined. And I really wanted to have a sense of, is this a company that the CEO still thinks he owns a company, or does he really realize he's public? And making sure that, I think it's been a great experience, but making sure too that I understood just the mentality and the culture of the senior leadership team.
I also think that it's probably likely that I don't know about the rest of you here, but I was the first diverse person on the board that I'm on, and I feel a responsibility once I'm there that I'm not checking the box for you. I'm here to add value, and I absolutely enjoy the relationships that I have with the other board members and the management team, but working an agenda of my own, if you will, which is to help this company's board reflect the community that we serve from a diversity standpoint. And there's a long way to go in the US with regard to that.
And one thing I wanted to add with the comment that Melanie made about, and just what you just mentioned, Kathy, about kind of checking the block. And during the interview process, I actually, asked that question, Nucor Steel. So again, steel company, steel medicine. And so when they asked me to join, I really said, I'm not naive. I'm Black and I'm a female. What do you really think that I can add? What is it in my skill set, or is it, hey, we just want to diversify our board? So I just cold asked them that. Didn't miss a beat. They weren't like start stuttering like, they just said, no, in the steel industry, safety is paramount. And in healthcare, you all have a different way of looking at, health, safety at the strategic level, patient safety, and how we do, those incident, when there's an incident, how you do, you do the evaluations, and I'm blanking on the word, but anyway, there's a process where you look at, okay, what process in what system areas do we have problems with that we can fix? And so they actually had a plan. So it's like, yeah, you happen to be a Black female, but we really think that just a different look, because if you get all steel people to look at safety, they're going to come at it the same way, because that's how they were raised up in that industry. So that was very refreshing. And that really, kind of tipped that. And then I think I talked when we were talking at first, the book that I read to learn about the company, where even though the steel industry is still a very male and in a very white industry, just on where they are, especially at the senior levels where the steel mills are. And they have a history of, early on, looking at racial issues. I mean, the father of Nucor, Ken Iverson, I think I mentioned to you, went in 1962, went to South Carolina where they had segregated break rooms, and said, this won't work. I need all my people to work together. When they asked him, when do you want your Negroes to come through? When he was doing a staff call, he goes, I want them to come through with everyone. What do you mean? 1962 in South Carolina, that wasn't popular. But he said that I want to make the company successful. So he was kind of a trailblazer in that, and that company kept that culture. And I can tell you, when the George Floyd murder occurred, that was one company that, the CEO immediately spoke to his people, immediately looked and said, hey, we thought we had a good culture, but we are missing the boat because some of our teammates, and that's what they don't call them employee, they call them teammates, were hurting, and I didn't know it. And so literally he made some changes. And for the first time ever, they didn't just put one, person that was in charge of a mill. There's 8, went from 0 ever to 8 in less than a year. And his comment was, I didn't just go out and find some Black people to put up there. We had teammates within our organization that, we were overlooking. And now we need to be better at it. And so that's kind of the culture piece. And, during the interviews, if you can get that out of people, sometimes it's hard, but I love that company because they really care and they want to make a difference. And yes, it's a steel company and I didn't know anything about it. I know a lot now about the different areas, but like Karen was saying, it's something that you're passionate about. And I was passionate about the way they took care of their people. And so I think that's one when you're looking to join an organization. And I don't want to steal too much time, but I want to say another quick one. In a nonprofit, people make the difference. I recently joined the board of trustees of an educational institution, Mount St. Mary's, who happens to had the president of it happens to be, and I think we talked about this in the small group when we first met, a class of 83, President Trainer, who used to be the dean at West Point. And the culture that he fosters there, it just trickles down to the board. I mean, the students love him because he knows them and cares about them. He's diligent with ensuring that the board is kept informed. And so something like that. And the only reason that I joined that board is because he was there. And so that's kind of that West Point connection, because it's a known quantity. That a person like that is going to, foster a culture that really will bring people in. So,
I also think that with companies and leadership teams and boards that, maybe traditionally have been all male, it's pretty attractive to talk to a woman Academy graduate. And I think it's, when first of all, 8 years ago, when I got a call about this board, it was not on my radar at all. I almost didn't return the call because I was a little clueless, quite honestly. I had my head down in my day job. And I went and spoke to my boss about it. And he's like, you're crazy if you don't call them back. And so I did. But when I was like, how did you find me? And they were pretty upfront. They said, the restaurant industry for years has been pretty male dominated and we have only men on our board. And we're trying to find somebody who's accustomed to working in an all male environment and can be productive in it and can help move us along. And the first thing we thought of was Women Academy graduates. And so, I think it's, and I forget who said it earlier. It's totally true that the key is if somebody doesn't make that phone call to you, don't do what I did and almost not return the call, because it's that very first invitation is the door opener for the rest. And I think that what I like to do now is, I can't do any more than my day job and 2 boards. I'm maxed out. And so, but when I hear for those opportunities, I'm always trying to tease out what is the specialty you're looking for, because it's a real great pay it forward opportunity to people I know who are looking for board service, who may have that same skill set and pass those opportunities along, because boards are generally filled through networking more than any other way.
Absolutely. And Kathy, it sounds like they were quite clear that they were looking for a diverse voice, right? And also Nadja, they were just transparent. How did you sort of test, I guess, where they were on and this question we talked a little bit about, but we are getting some Q&A. So if you are a participant and on the call, whether we deployed together or served in Korea together, or you were a mentor of one of ours, I'm looking at all the names in the chat, and it's everything that I can do to not private message 90% of everyone, including some professors and friends and supporters along the way, or maybe a yearling or two. I have questions in the chat, but one of them is around, is in the Q&A, and then there is around diversity, equity, and inclusion. Texas Roadhouse came to you, Kathy, because you had a lived experience that was different. They were upfront about having a male-dominated white industry. How have you seen your military experience, your lived experience, and your corporate experience as a very senior executive at J&J? How have you seen that kind of come together on the board, be honored, and even as Nadja talked about, even rapidly advance in the last 18 months or so with the social reckoning?
Yeah, I mean, I will say the one thing that I'm not sure I'm exactly answering your question, but one thing I do want to share that has been important to me is, I'm 59 years old. I've been working for a very long time, and I feel like I'm at this window where, what I have to offer is sort of peaking, and I try to bring the worlds together as much as I can so that the sum of the parts is more than the math equation, right? And so, I sit on Wounded Warrior Project's board, and it's incredibly meaningful to me. And I've bridged that over to Texas Roadhouse, which has a very strong veteran-focused, effort. I've also bridged Wounded Warrior over to J&J, where we've formed a formal neuroscience partnership on PTSD and suicide prevention. And it's a little bit of the magic of getting to a certain part of your professional and personal life where the pieces can come together, and suddenly it's not routine work anymore. It's very meaningful work, and it's trying to make these personal and meaningful connections. And that, to me, that's been the most rewarding part of it, is finding ways that, because I happen to be the person who's there at the intersection of two otherwise, unknown entities to each other, I'm able to find a way to bridge them together, and they can do great work together. To me, that's been the absolutely most rewarding part of it.
Great. Anyone else like to comment about testing the board culture and figuring out what the board culture was like at an organization? Well, we'll move on. I think that's great. And let's see. So Jen, you talked initially about this kind of amazing opportunity coming through the West Point network, and Nadja, you joined a board where there's a fellow grad as the president with Mount St. Mary's. So that's fantastic. Karen, I wanted to come back to you about because in prepping for the call and for our meeting today, I thought it was interesting. I saw a Q&A that you did that talked about how one of the things you were interested most about private sector life was a lack of hierarchy, and certainly you were trained at West Point and had discipline. But can you talk a little bit more about those fundamentals of being a West Pointer or being an Army officer, and how those helped you in your operational experience, and then were maybe a part of your board journey as well?
I think that, yes, for all of us, I think that our experience in the military is something that, we just can't ever get away from. You can't take the Army away from the girl, or the ordnance officer away from the girl, or West Point. It's always there. But I think for me, because I was only in the Army for 5 years, I didn't have the transition challenges of having rank that's not visible, and being able to weigh the power hierarchies, because I was able to experience that on my career journey. So my so from what I've seen is that, you know, when officers get out of the military, particularly if they've been in and they're a colonel, or that's sometimes a challenge as they try to navigate civilian life and they're not in a militaristic or a paramilitary organization. So I think from that point I had experience, but I mean, sometimes just honesty is important. You know, our basic values that we learn from our very first summer at Beast, those are so important as you progress in your organization. You know, so I think that the Army values and the West Point values are what's really important as we, you know, govern an organization and work with the senior leadership team and advise them, you know, is what we're doing honest, right? You know, duty on our country. You know, if something happens to a large group of people, what does the company do? You know, it's one thing if it's a refund to one person, but if it's a recall, and that's going to cost millions of dollars, you want that company to make that same decision that they would make, right? Even though we have an obligation to our shareholders. So I would say that the values are probably the most important thing that have stuck with me. And then the ability to learn probably is something else. You have to learn in every position. And then knowing your lane and being respectful in your lane. We're not here to run that organization or to pass judgment or to make any decisions for the CEO or the management team. We're here to govern, and we're here to make sure that our shareholders are getting the returns that they expect and that our company is successful. So I think it's those higher things that we're here. And then, of course, to support the leaders, right? But that it's not our day job.
And if I could jump off of, you know, Karen's lead, I feel like, you know, you both have described, you and Kathy have described this like expectation that people had of, you know, inviting a West Point woman to join their board. And you know, Kathy described it and we never talked about it, but I made the assumption that that's why the CEO reached out to his niece, the West Point graduate, to find someone who, you know, and I think they thought they were getting something, but like many of us on this call, you know, we fit a mold and we were put in a job, but then we can blow it up in a way that is, we can outperform, we can, you know, outwork, we can deliver in ways that they never expected. But of course, we just needed to be given the opportunity. And now I really like this inflection point that we're at. And I think most of you have kind of talked about paying it forward and how can you kind of, you know, do the right thing for others who come behind us. And, you know, there is now this investor evaluation of your board dynamics. And so Melanie talked about, you know, reaching a certain percentage. And now, but you know what gets their attention is when, you know, investors and funds will not invest their money unless they have, you know, they exhibit diversity on that board and in their executive leadership. And that really gets their attention. So if we have that inflection point, that opportunity, how can we, you know, kind of maximize that opportunity across this network to deliver in ways, again, that, you know, perhaps were unexpected, but always, you know, blow out expectations.
Well, I think that there's two things that we want to talk about. So one is how, you know, how do we use the nominating and governance process, the nominating committee, how, you know, as women, so that we can help diversify the board, you know, the boards that we're on and the boards in the country. But the other thing is how do we want to influence? How do you know you're being an influencer? How do you know your voice is being heard? And, you know, for me, it's through that relationship. So I talked earlier about your board time. You want it to be 10, 12 years because that trust is, trust is earned. And when you and that CEO he's asking you for advice, you know, or she's asking you for advice, it's their company, but, you know, they're going to bring a decision before the board and they want to have someone to discuss it with. and they pick up the phone and they call you, then you know that's when you really know that that your opinion matters, and you get that through you know, through developing a trusting relationship and that respect.
Karen, that's great, because one of the questions that came through in the chat was around voice, right? We've heard there are some informal things that sometimes you hear, well, on this board, you really need to sit on your hands for a year. Melanie, I heard you say, I wanted to make sure that I could speak, same Jen, with you too, right? And so it sounds like what I'm hearing is your voice actually gets amplified over time. You do want to test board culture, Jen and Melanie. Like, is it okay that I speak in year one? Right? Is that allowed? And that seems kind of silly, but why is that out there about sitting on your hands at first and then getting a voice? Although it is sort of positive to the question in the chat, which is.
But I like the way Karen
that goes-
kind of talked about that. It was a little bit of intellectual humility to go, I have a lot to offer, but I also have something to learn about the way that, you know, the dynamics and how to influence. So I viewed it more as less about hands tied, but more about intellectual humility to kind of learn a little bit before going in guns blazing.
And I think my first year on the board, my voice was there, but it was mostly asking questions, you know, and I think that also sort of establishes that, you know, I'm not a potted plant, nor will I ever be a potted plant here, you know. And so, but the first year or so really was just trying to learn the culture and why this, why that, and help me understand. And I was grateful that they're super happy to you know, to spend the time to teach and allow me to learn. And over time, you know, it's interesting to watch, because I joined a board, you know, at 59 years old. I'm 12 or 13 years younger than the next youngest board director. So
Wait, say that again?
yeah, they're a lot older than I am, right? And
Wow.
so now you start getting to a point where a lot's happened in the working world in the last 10 years that these board directors never faced in their careers. It's you know, like these ESG committees, they're like, what? You know, what is that and why do we need it? You know, it's a real way to help and assist an organization to stay modern and relevant. And so I love having the voice, and it's, you know, it's the only place in my life I'm the youngest of anything. So it's kind of awesome from that standpoint too. But, you know, there's, you know, not once did I feel like I had to keep my mouth shut, nor would I have stayed if I thought I had to.
And I would just say also, we haven't talked about this, but when you do get the opportunity, whether it's on a public board or a nonprofit or an industry association, also think about, it is more time, but consider the committees that are available and what you can learn both from giving and participating in the committees. On the DEC board, I was asked to chair remuneration, which is comp for all the US people. And I chair the benefits committee at Magellan, but those are two very different things. And quite honestly, it was a big professional growth opportunity for me. It still is, especially under UK law. But it's been, the leadership team, the consultants have been great. And I felt like through the committees, I also sit on the audit committee. DC is a smaller company, and on the safety sustainability. Those are great platforms to ask, like Kathy was talking about, lots of questions, especially that first 6 months to a year. You can also use your voice for your committees. And I would make that statement also for the you know, the charity and the association industry boards that people may choose to sit on too. The committees can be a great place to, one, I won't build alliances, might be too strong, but really get to know board members at a different level, at a different type of meeting and setting, but also really get a chance to learn aspects of the company from a governance and oversight that do bubble up to certainly the board levels, again, nonprofit or profit, but give you an opportunity to really be a voice at the table and really set strategy, oversight, and governance. So just share that too.
Nadia, was there a point that you were going to make as well? Because I think that the committee issue and joining the committees and also the time that committees take is something that we haven't explored very much. I thought it was interesting, Melanie, because it's a point of learning, it's a point of caring, it's a point of building relationships and trust. So I thought that was pretty interesting. Would anyone like to comment about the committee process or even how you learned about various committees? Because I think that that's something that folks would like to know about.
Well, sometimes I'll start. Sometimes in the recruiting process, the board chair will just disclose to it out of the gate, we're interested in you for this committee, and they will be very specific with you.
Mm-hmm.
And then and sometimes it's your choice, and it'll just be whatever you want, except for this one is full. Or so I would say that it really depends on the culture and of the board and your skill set and what's important to you. I mean, if for people that are finance or accounting background or they're CFO, you kind of, sorry to say, you know where you're going to go. But for the rest of us, we actually have some choices, and it kind of all depends. But most boards won't tell you no if you want to go and sit on another committee, and I've seen that work as well.
We have so many questions, but I realize that we're almost out of time. I want to make a quick shout out for the West Point Women's Conference that will be at our alma mater, our Rockbound Highland home, April 7th through the 9th of next year. I do want to send a shout out to Maureen Allison, who I think is also on the call as the president of West Point Women, for inspiring and kicking us in the pants to get this on the schedule. And I know that we'll have many, hopefully, maybe we'll have another roundtable discussion at the conference. And I know, Nadja, I think you're our executive sponsor. So thank you in advance for serving on behalf of West Point Women. Other questions include, best time to join a board. What is onboarding like? How do you thread the needle for networking? So we have many more things to discuss, but we want to be crisp and on time. And so I want to say thank you to everyone for contributing. Thank you for disclosing your ages, even though we outed you with your year groups. And that is Nadja. And I know you all have classmates that are shouting and sending you a lot of shout outs. Nadja, Kathy, Karen, Jen, and Melanie. Thank you, West Point Women, and thank you everyone for all of our attendees and participants.